Something's creeping, it's right outside. So come on in, and don't be shy. We've got ghosts and UFOs. Brace yourself, get ready for the show. Don't be afraid of the dark. The fun's about to start. Nightmares our tales will inspire. Oh, tonight at the Scaredy Campfire. Have you heard tell of a demon next door? Or maybe a cryptid on the lake shore? There's nothing too strange for us here. So if you're ready, stamp out your fear. Don't be afraid of the dark. The fun's about to start. Nightmares our tales will inspire. Tonight at the Scaredy Campfire. Whoa, whoa.
It's episode 4 of the Scaredy Campfire, campers. We're coming right back at you with some more stories, and like always, a huge, heaping thank you to all of you out there who let us use your stories for the show. Our first story for today comes from Live Classroom 4811 on Reddit. I really rarely talk about this because it was so long ago, and most people will just look at you like a loon, but it did happen, so here it is. Right after my parents got divorced, I lived in a house with my mom that was older, but not super old. It was one of those main-level houses that had an upstairs apartment, which is where I lived. When we first moved in, I would always hear someone walking up the stairs that led directly to my bedroom door late at night. I always assumed that it was my mom coming to check in and make sure my TV was off, blah blah blah, that sort of thing. This went on for a few months until I, an angsty teen, decided to ask my mom why she felt the need to walk up every night to make sure that I was asleep, and that it was just, in fact, waking me up. My mother is a Southern belle through and through and has no reason to lie, especially about parenting, and told me that she had never once done that. Mainly because she could actually see from the bottom of the stairs through the crack in the doors if my TV was on or not. This was WTF number 1. Pretty much immediately after that, I was home alone on a Saturday, sitting in the living room on the first floor. I heard a sound that I can only describe as Lucifer himself clawing through the rafters. I immediately ran upstairs and saw that anything that was on the counter was on the floor. Almost all at once, from the CD player in my bedroom to the soaps in the shower, everything was on the ground. I was freaked the heck out, so I called my dad to come pick me up and told him all about it when he did. They made me speak to the divorce counselor about this one, so I knew that no one was actually taking me seriously. Finally, as an avid Ghost Adventures fan, I took it upon myself to communicate with this thing. So, one night, I waited until the witching hour and set up the Ghost Radar app on my iPod Touch and got to work. I was standing in the bathroom and simply said, "If you are here, make yourself known." Immediately, my toothbrush flew off the counter so fast that it hit the wall behind me. I've never been able to explain this, but even typing this, I have chills going through my body. The house was a year-to-year rental, so we moved out a few weeks after this, and I didn't think about it much until a few years ago, when me and my sister started talking about how creepy that house was around my mom. She went on to explain that she fully agreed and would deter it when we were kids to qualm our fears. She gave us full details of times that she would wake up with a figure standing at the foot of her bed and her being paralyzed with fear. She even had an encounter where she was in the bathroom, watched her bedroom door open and shut, and a shadow stand in the corner until she closed her eyes. Ghosts are real, and if you're looking for a home in Indian Trail, North Carolina, I recommend avoiding the 3-bed, 3-bath in the Cascades. Our second story comes from Affectionate Cow 5128 on Reddit. I realize you probably will have heard the story/tale of Harry Martindale in York all those years ago. I can assure you when this event/experience happened, I 100% hadn't heard of this tale, so it was quite unique to me. After finishing work quite late, maybe around 8 p.m., My partner had met me from the training ground where I was coaching, and we decided to go for a pub dinner, as we quite frequently did at that point in time. There was a pub not far from where we lived back then called the Peacock Inn. Icknield Street. This is a Roman road itself. The pub indeed has its own story of a Roman legionnaire which haunts the grounds. I must add that I've been to that pub maybe 100 times and never seen a thing. Anyhow, we had our meals and made a night of it. We stayed till last orders and then jumped in the car. We were driving along a country lane just after 11:30 p.m. It was the 19th of November, 2018. From memory, it was a Monday night, and, as you might well imagine, it was a pitch-black night at that time of year. At a point during the journey, we reached the brow of a hill on a lane where we were traveling along, our headlights affording us a good view of the dip in front of us, and the subsequent rise again of the road afterwards. As it was winter, there were no leaves or foliage on the trees, so we had a much better than normal view. As we crested the brow, my partner, who was driving, slammed her brakes on, with the headlights still set on full beam. In the distance, at the bottom of the hill, was what appeared to be something like 20 or 30 Roman soldiers coming out of the field of our left and crossing the road dead ahead of us. The men seemed solid, but colors were hard to make out, and they seemed to be lit by a light source coming from behind them, like a spotlight. We originally thought that it was the moonlight, perhaps, but in revisiting the scenario from memory, this now seems unlikely, as it was too bright and at the ground level. Once they had crossed the road, they seemed to disappear into the darkness of the opposite field, which would possibly seem to suggest that the moonlight wasn't involved at all. We both sat in silence, watching the scene unfold about 100/200 meters ahead of us. I personally was in a state of disbelief and shock, maybe even fear. My partner, though, was able to put her feelings into words, and simply said, "What the heck is that?" While we didn't manage to actually count the precise number of men involved, I was able to see that all of the men were on foot, except for one, who was on horseback at the very front of the group. The foot soldiers appeared to be walking in twos, side by side. The horse was large, like Shire horse size, with bushy, furry legs. The mounted soldier appeared to be carrying a big stick-like object with something around the top of it. However, it was hard to make out the object precisely, due to the fact that it was witnessed side-on. Amazingly, no other cars or traffic came up or down the road in this space of time, and once the coast was clear, we drove, apprehensively, down the hill and back up the other side. What really flabbergasted us was the fact that at the bottom of the hill where these figures had made their way onto the road surface, there was no physical gap in the field border/hedgerow involved. I have been lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, enough to see a ghost when I was younger, maybe 15 years old. And that was a typical translucent figure which scared the hell out of me. But these figures seemed, from a distance, just like normal people. Our third story comes from Fat Boy Fatsy on Reddit. A bit of a long one, but this is our experience, and open to any suggestions to help deal with it, if any exist. To begin, my fiancé and I both have had some form of experience with the paranormal, some of which could be very easily disputed and others not so much. For instance, as a kid, my siblings and I came home from being out and found the back door wide open. We all swear that it was closed, but it could have been left open or unlocked and someone came in. Other experiences I've had was where my dog was barking at my bookshelf, and then the books that were sitting there, about an inch or two away from the edge, fell off and ended up all over the floor. My fiancée has had her experiences in one of her old houses, where her ex was pinned to their bed and one of her kids dragged down the hallway by a spirit, and other moments where her kids would see spirits in their old houses. Now that some of our history is said, let's fast forward to our experiences a couple years ago. It started one day whilst I was home watching TV. Our spice rack that was very much secured to the wall in the kitchen had fallen down, knocking over our knife block. The knife block and all the spices fell onto the floor, with one knife laying in the center of the hallway, facing down the room that I was in. After that happened, my fiancé kept seeing shadows outside of our bedroom door, so we set up a camera in our hallway that looked towards our room. One night, we were laying in bed and heard the camera switch between the night vision and the daytime. I opened the camera and was watching it while my fiancé watched out into the hallway. The whole time that my fiancé was watching in the hallway, she didn't see anything. However, the camera picked up a light flash up near the ceiling with no actual source visible to the naked eye. The shadows continued until one night, our daughter, who was 8 years old at the time, came into our room crying and petrified. She proclaimed to have heard a knock on the window from outside. She was sleeping in her brother's room, who was 3 at the time, but at his dad's house. We went outside to see if there's anything in the backyard and couldn't see anything apart from our dog laying on the door, confused as to why we were coming out. We went into our elder daughter's room to ask if she or her friend had heard a knocking at the windows. They stated they did, but they thought that it was us. We then proceeded to get our younger daughter settled in our room, and about 30 minutes later, our eldest daughter and her friend came running into our room petrified because they heard something say our daughter's name clear as daylight. After which, my fiancée began to see a face at the top of our bedroom door. She described it as a pale face with long black hair and eyes that would change from black to red to spiraling in an angry form. However, she couldn't see a body. With this, I began playing worship music and attempted to pray over all of us and rebuke whatever it was. Once I had started, my fiancée began to see bars going across our door frames that were a bright, pure white color. That night we weren't able to get much sleep, and both of us had to cancel our shifts at work the next day. Throughout that whole period after that, my fiancée continuously saw that face as if it was tormenting us. So we purchased an EMF reader from eBay, which would continuously spike in different rooms, but most prominently in our youngest son's room, our room, and the kids' lounge room. Then, one day, our youngest boy, 3 years old, came home from his dad's house and began breaking down full-on crying, attempting to take his clothes off as if they were irritating him, and began saying to get out and leave, and that he doesn't want them here, and he kept looking up to the corner of the lounge room. And he would scream, "Get out!" And we didn't know what to do or how to help him, and managed to eventually calm him down, and he had no real recollection of what had even happened. After that, it was just the usual shadow figures and the face for a while, until one night we had my brother at our house, where we were playing Murder in the Dark. He hid in our youngest's closet and came out midway through the game stating that he doesn't want to play anymore. He looked physically shaken and proclaimed that something grabbed him on his back, and we had a look at his back, and there were scratch marks going all the way down his shoulder blade area. It's safe to say we no longer played that game. Again, it was back to shadows and faces until one of the final straws for us at our old house. My fiancée and I were laying in bed, and our youngest son, 4 at the time, and youngest girl, 9 at the time, and eldest boy, 13 at the time, were out in the main lounge room playing Roblox. Our youngest daughter and eldest son came running into our room saying there's something wrong with our youngest. My fiancé and I ran out to the lounge room and found him lying on the couch, bawling his eyes out and speaking incoherently. We picked him up, and my fiancé took him to our room, and I asked the elder two what had happened, to which they both said that he just got really, really angry and was going to throw the Xbox controller at something in the dining room. My fiancé asked our youngest what was going on, and he stated that it was coming at us, and I didn't want it to. We managed to get him settled, and he soon fell asleep, after which we began to try to find out what it was and what it wanted, using things like GhostTube and the EMF reader, and the responses we got indicated that it was allegedly evil and wanted our youngest and I. After, we again rebuked it, and only saw the shadows. We have, of course, since moved into our new house and finally started to get back to normal from it all. However, our youngest boy, who's now 5, doesn't really want to sleep in his own room, and we've begun hearing footsteps and seeing the shadows again as well, and hearing things bang throughout different periods of the day when no one was near where it came from. A couple of times at night, when I was trying to fall asleep, I heard something yell in my ear, but it hasn't happened since. However, my fiancé and I are both really itchy on our arms and legs and have random bruises coming up, but that could be low iron or something in the water. We've both gotten crystals to help cleanse the house, and it's supposed to ward off any spirits, but I don't think they work. I have a crystal that I wear, which is black tourmaline, and I think that it's helped a little bit for now, though. Sorry for the long post. Our fourth story comes from LaserCat121 on Reddit. In 2023, me and my wife and son were living in a rental bungalow as we're waiting for our house to be finished from building work. It's a very nice bungalow and a very nice place, possibly around 70 to 80 years old. My son's bedroom was in the loft conversion, which also had an ensuite bathroom. I'm in his bedroom telling him off about how messy his bedroom is and how he's going to reorganize everything and tidy up, and as I do, I glance toward the bathroom door to see a very tall but stick-like figure dart from the doorway and hide behind the door. It freaked me out, but I was with my son, so I very quickly did not show any change of emotion, as I couldn't quite believe what I saw, and carried on telling my son off. And then my son looked at me and screamed out, "I've just seen somebody run into the bathroom and hide behind the door." He had saw it too. The figure was like a 6-foot tall stickman, and it moved like a real man, but very, very fast. It was kind of black in color, and if I said it had to resemble something, I would say that it resembled one of those stickmen that artists use. You see available in all the art shops where you can pose the arms and legs around. Our fifth story comes from roleplayer6011 on Reddit. I can't pinpoint exactly when I first came to experience this. Best I can remember is I was around the age of 10 to 11, although it's possible that the occurrences began a little earlier than this. However, I vividly remember being scared of my bedroom window once it got dark, because of what I very regularly saw. On numerous occasions, I would see the same face in the bottom left corner on the outside of the window, just looking in at me. For context, my bedroom at the time was on the second floor of the house, so no possibility this was just somebody walking outside the window, unless they were over 15 feet tall. Despite this occurring over 20 years ago now, for context, I'm in my mid-30s, I can still recall that face. It was distinctly male, with thin, unkempt hair, and the skin pulled in as though the figure was starved. If I had to age the figure, my best guess was that it was in its 30s, maybe 40s. Oddly, the one detail that I can't remember is the eyes. The reason I can remember this much detail is because it was always the same face, always in the same position. Seeing this figure would always give me a sense of dread, and I would do whatever I could to pretend that it wasn't there, watching me. I would suddenly glue my eyes to the TV, or pick up a book and start reading, hoping that it would leave me alone. I didn't have curtains in my bedroom, so I didn't have that as an option back then. And whenever I called my parents to check, they never saw anything and simply passed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. That dread that I felt whenever I saw the figure would stay with me for the rest of the night until I managed to eventually fall asleep. And when I did sleep, I would have upsetting dreams almost every single night. Dreams of being chased, and in a lot of cases, killed. I remember speaking to my therapist about a reoccurring dream I would have where I was chased and thrown off a bridge, one that I had to cross on my way back from school, but for some reason they didn't ever read too much into it. To this very day I still have issues sleeping. My partner has mentioned several times that I have a tendency to whimper in my sleep, as if frightened, and I can never sleep through a full night either, waking up at least 2 or 3 times for no particular reason. I also still try to avoid going past windows at night, unless the windows are drawn first, and even then I still feel slightly uneasy. It wasn't just seeing the figure in the window either. There would be occasions I would go and turn on the light in my room, but it wouldn't work. It would turn on and the bulb would do something, but the light was very dim. Just a dark orange glow, barely lighting anything up. The first time this happened, I instinctively knew that something was wrong, and every subsequent time instilled that very same anxiety. The bit that I never got to understand was why that it happened. Every time it did, I would quickly turn the light back off and call my parents, and they would come up and turn the light on for me, and everything worked just fine. It was only ever when I was alone that the light would play up like this, just as it was only ever when I was alone that I would see the figure in the window, as if it was trying to mess with my mind, or just didn't want to make its presence known to anyone else but me. After several years of this, my sister started to become frightened of a gray figure stalking my father around the house, which only ever she could see. On one occasion, she started screaming and crying for apparently no reason. When we managed to calm her down enough to speak, she told us she saw the feature reaching out and trying to stab my father in the back. It was at this point that I definitely knew something wasn't right, and confided in the school chaplain. We weren't a religious family in any sense, but I did attend a Catholic high school, and at this point I didn't really know who else to turn to. The school chaplain came over to the house and blessed the premises, which wasn't really a full exorcism. He did make sure to bless every room, anointing the doorways with holy water. Whatever it was that we experienced, all the strange occurrences stopped following the visit from the chaplain. We moved house roughly 18 months after that, and I've lived in several houses since then and have never ever experienced that figure again. But, as mentioned, I'm still anxious about going near windows at night, so its effects upon me are still very real. Whatever it was that I did experience, what my family experienced, I can't say for sure. Perhaps a ghost or some malevolent entity? I really have no idea, but I wanted to share my experience nonetheless. This story comes from Peach G Fuel on Reddit. This happened back in 2009 in Puerto Rico, and we still don't really know what it was. The encounter was this. Back in 2009, 4 friends and I were walking home from a basketball game in the suburbs that are near our neighborhood. It was around 8 p.m. and pretty dark. There were 2 ways to go into the neighborhood. The first was the shortcut, which consisted of cutting through the middle of an abandoned paintball park in an open field, and it would take about 10 minutes to arrive to our homes. Second was the long way, which takes about 25 to 30 minutes walking in a brightly lit area surrounded by houses and endless illuminated roads that finished right on the entrance of an abandoned park, and then 5 minutes of walking in semi-illuminated areas. We took the shortcut like we did every time, but this time, everything was quiet. No animal sounds like abandoned dogs that took shelter there. No car sounds, just pure silence as far as we could hear. One of my friends decides to start talking about how we must be cool and play Ouija in the middle of the field, as a joke. We tell him to shut up collectively because we were pretty scared. We saw the entrance of the park up ahead, and we started getting less stressed and just started talking again like normal. We were only about 100 feet from the entrance when we all hear and feel stomps coming from behind us, but not regular stomps. Heavy stomps like an elephant or a bull running right behind us. We all quickly looked back, and there was this strange shaped creature with really dim red eyes. At first it looked completely dark, but as it got closer we saw that it was grayish and charging right at us. We all looked at each other and ran as fast as we possibly could toward the entrance and barely managed to get out. Later on down the path, there's a part of the street that briefly overlooked the field that we were in, and we all scrambled to the edge to see if we could see anything of whatever it was that was chasing us, but all we saw were 2 dim red dots that seemed to be staring right at us. We all went home, then the next day tried to figure out what the heck happened. Of the 5 of us that were there, 4 of us can all confirm this story. Sadly, one of my friends passed away a couple of years ago. I did move eventually, but I do have to travel every weekend through that area to visit my family. But it still gives me the creeps going through there at night. Our next story comes from Civilian on Reddit. This one's really recent. I was driving back from my parents' house not but a couple of hours ago, around 10 p.m. on my local time zone. I'm from Sao Paulo, Brazil. As I was driving, I saw something on the lane to my right. Something that I can only describe as streaks of white lights. They went so fast. I thought for a millisecond that it could be a very fast cyclist, but it's impossible to be a cyclist on the highway. This is one of the fastest highways in the country. The speed limit is 120 kilometers per hour, which is about 74 miles per hour. But on Sunday night, when the road is clear, drivers really don't go less than 130 to 140 kilometers per hour, which is more like 80 to 86 miles per hour. I personally was going around 80. The lack of lights would get this cyclist killed in less than a minute. It's a stretch that's almost entering the city, but it's still technically a rural area. Whatever it was, it had the shape of a humanoid, kind of, but it was just lights. These white, shining lights. Thankfully, I wasn't alone in the car. My girlfriend was with me in the passenger seat. I asked her if she saw anything, but she was on the phone and said that she didn't see anything. I've already had multiple encounters with the supernatural in my life. This wasn't the first time, but I'm still very curious as to what it might have been on that dark road. Now, these next 2 stories both come from Sternin Hexy on Reddit. And this is going to be quite the long post, but I'll try to tell it in the best way possible to keep it entertaining. English isn't my first language, so I hope that everything's clear enough. My first ever paranormal experience happened to me when I was just a kid. Probably not more than 10 years old. I was visiting a male friend who lived in a small town, while I lived in the city nearby. We used to spend afternoons playing video games together. My friend lived with his grandmother in a big house, and his grandmother's brother, who was terminally ill, also lived there. He was a frail old man with pale skin, white hair, and light blue eyes. I rarely ever saw him, but I always felt uneasy around him, and we referred to him as Uncle. His room was right across from my friend's, and one of the house rules was no closed doors. One day we were playing and making a lot of noise when I saw the grandmother's brother sit up on his bed through the partially open door. I saw his legs move, and he sat up, and I told my friend and another friend who was with us to keep the volume down because we'd woken his uncle up. At that moment, my friend turned to me with wide eyes and asked me to repeat what I just said. I told him that his uncle was awake. My only concern was that he'd tell us off for being too loud, and then my friend looked very seriously at me and said that his grandmother's brother had died about a month and a half ago. I insisted that I'd seen him. That was crazy. I'd just seen him sit up in the bed. I even saw him move. We all got really scared and ran out of the room. We ended up telling his grandmother, and she said that she still sometimes feels her brother's presence in the house and wasn't surprised that I had seen him. She herself sometimes thought that she saw him out of the corner of her eye while she's doing chores around the house. After that scare, we moved the game console to the downstairs living room, and my friend even switched bedrooms with his grandmother. He was pretty shaken up and told me that he couldn't sleep after that. And the second story actually happened in my high school years. I don't remember exactly which year, but I know that I was still young. One summer, I went to visit my grandmother who lived in the countryside. That night, there was a party in the community, and my mother and brother decided to both go, but I stayed with my grandfather. After dinner, I went outside to play with my grandfather's dog since he was watching TV. The patio was dark except for the porch light meters away. I was playing with the dog when I suddenly saw a figure moving onto the porch. The figure was ethereal, like a white mist moving in the air. I couldn't make out all of the limbs, but I could see the shape and the movement, which was exactly like my grandmother's. My grandmother, who had actually died earlier that year, had always walked with some difficulty, always using crutches, and she had a very distinct, slow way of moving. I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I thought that maybe I was imagining things, but the dog didn't seem disturbed, though we were a bit far from the porch. But I watched as the figure walked across the porch and went right inside the house. I was more confused than scared, so after a while, I went inside and started looking for the strange figure. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I went into the guest room where my mom, brother, and I usually stayed. Just as I was about to change into my pajamas, I saw a small ball of light float from the bedside lamp. It moved, floating from the lamp, or maybe from the pillow, I'm not sure, and drifted toward the door that led to the living room. I peeked in after it, but it was gone. When my mother eventually came back from the party, I told her everything, but she said that I'd just imagined it and asked me not to tell my grandfather or brother. Apparently, my grandfather had been having strange dreams and visions lately, and this would really only make it worse. These are two paranormal experiences that have really stuck with me, but my first encounter with a ghost happened in my own home. One day, I was in the living room with my grandmother, who lived with us in her final years. We were having a snack together, and then I went into the bathroom. Before reaching the hallway, I saw a tall figure with a hat walking toward me. Instinctively, I stepped aside to let it pass and was left shocked, not knowing what I had actually just seen. My grandmother noticed something was up and asked me what was wrong. When I told her about the man in the hat, she scolded me and told me to stop talking nonsense. So, that was the end of it. I have to admit, even though these stories sound scary, I was usually more confused than frightened. Except when I saw my friend's uncle's ghost. That time I was actually terrified. My aunt, my mother's sister, has also seen ghosts ever since she was young, so I guess it's somewhat normal in our family. My aunt has had several paranormal experiences, and even saw her grandmother's spirit after she passed. Her house is also supposedly haunted by a dog spirit, and once she claimed to have seen my grandmother in her bedroom. This next story comes from KatieMama48 on Reddit. I worked in healthcare for years, and I have more stories than I have space to tell. Here are two real quick ones. Once I had a patient pass away in a nursing home, and that night the light above his bed kept flipping on. I asked the nurse if she was doing it, and she said no. She thought it was me. So I made her go with me to check it out. I said, if that light comes on, I'm done. But I stepped in, and sure enough, that chain pulled itself and the light popped on. Ugh. The second story is about my uncle, who actually passed away recently. I was recording because I had a strong feeling that something was going on. The nurse there was creeping me out, and my uncle looked scared to death. Later, when I listened back to the tape, I caught a voice on the recording. It wasn't him or anyone else in the room, but it sounded like his voice, even though he actually couldn't speak at the time.
As the night gets longer and the darkness creeps in, with the eerie silence broken only by whispering wind, come gather round the fire, the flickering flames, and hear the shiver up your spine. You'll be haunted by the things that you find. Legends will unfold and stories will be told.